The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as Anna poured herself a cup of coffee. The quiet hum of the house was her only company, just as it had been for years. At 52, Anna had grown accustomed to the stillness of her life. Days blurred into each other, marked by routine. Mornings with the newspaper, afternoons tending to her modest garden, and evenings lost in novels that offered a glimpse of a world more vibrant than her own. Her life wasn't unhappy, but it wasn't full either. After losing her husband a decade ago and watching her grown children carve out lives of their own, Anna had settled into solitude, convincing herself that this was enough. It was a Tuesday, unremarkable in every way, when she wandered into the local grocery store. The aisles were quiet, the scent of freshly baked bread mingling with the faint hum of the overhead lights. She moved through her usual list, adding items to her cart with practiced ease. And then she saw him. He stood by the produce section, examining a bunch of bananas with a curious intensity, as if the decision held profound significance. He was younger, maybe in his late 20s or early 30s, with an easy smile and an air of casual confidence that immediately drew her in. His dark hair curled slightly at the edges, and the sleeves of his shirt were rolled up, revealing strong forearms that hinted at a life of physical activity. Anna found herself slowing her pace, her eyes lingering on him longer than they should. She chided herself silently. What was she doing? It wasn't like her to notice a man, especially someone so much younger. But something about him felt magnetic, as though the air around him buzzed with energy she hadn't felt in years. As she reached for a head of lettuce, he turned and caught her eye. His smile was immediate, warm and unguarded. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth and light. "Do you know how to tell if these are ripe?" He held up a mango, looking at her with genuine curiosity. Anna blinked, momentarily thrown by the directness of his question. "Oh, I think it should be slightly soft when you press it," she replied, stepping closer. "Like this?" He pressed the fruit gently, glancing at her for approval. "Yes, that looks perfect," she said, smiling despite herself. "Thanks," he said, slipping the mango into his basket. "I'm Mark, by the way." "Anna," she replied, her voice steady though her heart fluttered. They exchanged a few more pleasantries before parting ways, but the encounter stayed with her as she finished her shopping. As she drove home, the memory of his easy smile and friendly demeanor lingered. It was such a small interaction, so fleeting and ordinary, yet it left her feeling lighter, as though something dormant inside her had stirred awake. She told herself it was silly, just a chance meeting with a stranger, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. For the first time in years, her predictable world had shifted, and the spark of possibility flickered on the edge of her thoughts. Anna didn't expect to see him again. Their grocery store encounter felt like one of those brief moments that pass and fade, leaving only a faint memory behind. But life, it seemed, had other plans. A week later, she was back in the same store, wandering the aisles with her carefully prepared list. As she reached for a box of cereal, a familiar voice broke through the quiet. "Anna!" She turned, surprised to see Mark standing there, holding a carton of almond milk. His grin was as warm as she remembered, and just like before, the sight of him sent a ripple through her otherwise calm demeanor. "Mark," she replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. "Fancy seeing you here again." "It's my usual haunt," he said with a chuckle. "Though I'll admit, I was hoping to run into you. I tried that mango trick you taught me, and it worked perfectly. Thought I owed you a thanks." They fell into an easy conversation, chatting about everything from favorite fruits to the unpredictability of weather. Before she knew it, 20 minutes had passed, and they were standing by the checkout lanes with their respective carts. "You know," Mark said, his tone light, "it's much more fun talking with you than just wandering the aisles. Want to grab a coffee sometime?" Anna froze for a moment. It wasn't a date, she told herself. It couldn't be. He was just being friendly. But even so, the thought of sitting across from him in a cafe, sharing more of these light, lively conversations, made her heart leap. "I'd like that," she said finally, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her chest. Over the next few weeks, their coffee outings became a regular occurrence. They'd meet at a small cafe nestled between the bookstore and the park, where the hum of conversation and the clatter of cups created a cozy backdrop for their growing connection. Mark was easy to talk to. He told her about his work as a landscape designer, his love for cooking, and his dream of one day traveling across Europe. Anna found herself sharing more than she expected, recounting stories of her children, her late husband, and the garden she poured her heart into. They laughed over shared quirks, like their mutual dislike for cilantro, and exchanged stories that bridged the years between them. With Mark, Anna felt something she hadn't in a long time. Seen, heard, and alive. One afternoon, as they strolled through the park after coffee, Mark stopped to admire a bed of roses. He crouched to inspect the blooms, his fingers brushing lightly against the petals. "You know," he said, looking up at her, "you remind me of these flowers." Anna raised an eyebrow, her lips quirking into a teasing smile. "Because I'm thorny." He laughed, shaking his head. "No, because you're beautiful and resilient. Even when life isn't perfect, you find a way to bloom." His words caught her off guard, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. The sincerity in his voice, the way he looked at her, it was something she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you, Mark," she said softly, her cheeks warming. As they walked on, their conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Anna couldn't shake the feeling that their connection was becoming something more. Each interaction with him added a new layer to her life, one filled with color and warmth she hadn't known she was missing. Anna sat in her garden that evening, the twilight sky painting the horizon in soft pinks and purples. She absent-mindedly traced the edge of her teacup, her thoughts drifting back to the park earlier that day. Mark's words echoed in her mind, "You find a way to bloom." It wasn't just what he'd said, though. It was the way he looked at her, his gaze filled with a depth that felt disarming and unfamiliar. For years, she had felt invisible, her age wrapping her in a cloak of irrelevance. But Mark had a way of peeling that cloak away with just a smile. She let out a sigh, the realization hitting her like a wave crashing against the shore. She was falling for him. The thought unsettled her. It wasn't logical. It wasn't practical. She was 52 and he was what? 30, if she had to guess? The gap between their ages felt like a canyon she couldn't possibly cross, no matter how much she might want to. Yet, she couldn't deny the way her heart raced when he smiled at her or the way his presence made the world feel lighter. He wasn't just kind or charming. He was attentive, genuine, and unafraid to truly see her. Anna's fingers tightened around the teacup as a flicker of guilt surfaced. Was she being selfish, even reckless, to feel this way? What would people think if they knew? Would her children understand, or would they judge her? But beneath the guilt was something else, something stronger. It was a long-forgotten thrill, a sense of being alive in a way she hadn't been for years. Mark wasn't just younger. He was vibrant, curious, and unapologetically present in every moment. She thought back to their laughter over coffee, their shared walks, the way he always seemed genuinely interested in her stories. She remembered how his hand had brushed hers while they admired the roses, the warmth lingering long after the touch had ended. It wasn't a friendship anymore. Not for her. Anna stood and walked to the edge of her garden, her gaze falling on the roses she'd planted years ago. They had survived harsh winters and dry summers, their blooms a testament to resilience. She placed a hand on one of the blossoms, her mind spinning. Falling for Mark felt as impossible as asking these roses to bloom forever. But wasn't life full of impossibilities? Hadn't she thought she'd never feel this way again? As the stars began to the evening sky, Anna made her way back inside. She stood at her kitchen sink, staring out at the garden, her reflection faint in the window. She didn't have answers yet, but one thing was certain. Mark had awoken something in her heart she thought had long since withered. And while she wasn't sure where this path would lead, she knew she couldn't ignore it. The spark he had ignited was too bright to extinguish. No matter how daunting the road ahead seemed, the days that followed were a tempest of emotions Anna couldn't quite control. She woke up with a mixture of excitement and dread, her thoughts immediately drifting to Mark. Each encounter they shared, each text or call, pulled her deeper into a whirlwind of feelings she hadn't felt in decades. She found herself lingering over her reflection in the mirror one morning, something she hadn't done in years. The fine lines around her eyes, the streaks of silver in her hair, she saw them differently now. Were they marks of age, or badges of a life well lived? She wasn't sure, but for the first time in a long time, she cared how she looked. Still, the doubt gnawed at her. What would Mark see in someone like her? He was young, vibrant, with the kind of boundless energy she hadn't felt since her 30s. Surely he could have anyone, someone closer to his age, someone with fewer scars from life. And yet, every time she saw him, the way he looked at her left no room for doubt. His attention wasn't fleeting or superficial. It felt real, grounding her even as her insecurities threatened to pull her under. But the world around her wasn't so kind. At the grocery store, she noticed a woman she vaguely knew from the neighborhood giving her a peculiar glance when she and Mark were chatting by the bakery counter. Anna had seen that look before, a mix of curiosity and judgment. It stung more than she cared to admit. That evening, she found herself pacing her living room, her mind a tangled mess. She thought about her children, especially her eldest daughter, who often spoke about age-appropriate choices in life. What would they say if they knew their mother was spending time with a man who was closer to their age than her own? And yet, as much as Anna feared the judgment, she couldn't let go of the joy Mark brought into her life. He made her feel seen, heard, and valued in a way she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just his youth or his charm. It was his kindness, his curiosity about her world, and his unwavering warmth. Late that night, she sat on her bed, staring out at the moonlit garden. Her thoughts raced back to their conversations. The way he made her laugh over something silly. The way his voice softened when he asked her about her late husband. Was it wrong to want this? To feel this way? Even if it defied everything she thought she knew about love and age. Anna let out a shaky breath. She was torn between the world's expectations and the quiet truth her heart whispered. This connection with Mark was rare, precious, and undeniably real. But was she brave enough to fight for it? That was the question that kept her awake long into the night, her heart aching with equal parts hope and fear. Anna stood in her kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the window as she absent-mindedly wiped the counter. The house felt quiet, too quiet, and her thoughts were anything but. For weeks, she had danced around her feelings for Mark, vacillating between moments of exhilaration and bouts of doubt. But after their last coffee outing, when he'd walked her to her car and lingered, his hand brushing hers as he said goodbye, she knew she couldn't keep pretending. She wanted to see him, truly see him, not in the middle of a crowded cafe or a bustling grocery store. She wanted to invite him into her world, to let him step past the polite boundaries they'd so carefully maintained. But how? The idea of asking him over felt monumental, as if she were crossing an invisible line she could never retreat from. Would he think it was too forward? Too presumptuous? Anna shook her head, trying to push the doubts away. She was too old for this kind of hesitation, wasn't she? Life was fleeting. A lesson she had learned the hard way after losing her husband. If Mark had taught her anything, it was that joy didn't come knocking on the door, you had to reach out and grab it. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her phone and typed out a message. Hi, Mark. I was wondering if you'd like to come by for dinner sometime this week. I'd love to cook for you. It's my way of saying thanks for all the smiles you've brought into my life lately. Her thumb hovered over the send button, her heart pounding. Was it too much? She read the message again, debating whether to delete it entirely. But then she thought of Mark's easy laughter, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his favorite recipes, and she hit send before she could overthink it any further. The response came almost immediately. I'd love that, Anna. Just tell me when and I'm there. Anna stared at the screen, a mix of relief and nerves washing over her. He wanted to come. Now all she had to do was figure out what to cook, and how to keep her composure when he was sitting across from her in the intimacy of her home. The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparations. She cleaned every corner of her house, dusting shelves she hadn't touched in months. She carefully chose a menu, something classic but impressive. Roasted chicken with herbs from her garden, paired with a light salad and her favorite red wine. The night of the dinner arrived faster than she expected. As she set the table with her best dishes and lit a few candles, Anna paused to take a deep breath. She smoothed her hands over her dress, a simple yet flattering one she hadn't worn in years, and glanced at the clock. When the doorbell rang, her heart leapt. She walked to the door, her nerves threatening to take over, but the moment she opened it and saw Mark standing there, holding a bouquet of sunflowers, his smile as warm as ever, all her anxiety melted away. You didn't have to bring flowers, she said, her voice soft as she accepted them. I wanted to, he replied. They reminded me of you, bright and full of life. Her cheeks flushed as she stepped aside to let him in, her heart already whispering that tonight would be the start of something she could no longer deny. The evening unfolded like a slow, sweet song, each moment stretching out as if time itself wanted to savor what was happening between them. Anna had worried about how she would feel once Mark was in her home, once the walls between them dissolved into something deeper. But as they sat together, wine glasses in hand, sharing the meal she'd prepared, her fears seemed distant, like shadows retreating in the warm glow of the candlelight. Mark had never felt so easy to be with. There was a comfort in his presence that soothed her, as if they had always known each other. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on everything from travel dreams to books they both loved, to the quiet moments of solitude they each craved. He listened with an intensity that made her feel like the most important person in the world, and as the evening wore on, Anna found herself sharing more than she had ever intended. I've always thought about visiting Italy, she said, her voice soft as she set her wineglass down. Just to wander around, not as a tourist but as someone who belongs. To breathe in the air and let it fill me up. Mark leaned forward, his eyes sparkling with understanding. I think you'd fit right in, he said, his voice low, as though sharing a secret. You have that kind of spirit, like you could be anyone, anywhere, and it would always feel like home. Anna laughed softly, a bit self-conscious. I haven't felt like I belong anywhere for a long time. She could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air, her own vulnerability creeping up as the wine loosened her tongue. Mark studied her face, his expression shifting to something more serious, more sincere. I think you belong here, he said, his voice so steady, so sure. Right now. Right here with me. The words settled between them, warm and real, and Anna felt her pulse quicken. She didn't know if it was the wine or the sheer intimacy of the moment, but something inside her shifted. Her thoughts, the ones that had kept her safely in her head, retreated, leaving space for something else, something that felt like longing, like desire. She met his gaze, her heart suddenly loud in her chest. The space between them felt too small, too fragile. She wanted him closer, so close she could feel his breath against her skin, his hands on hers. But there was still hesitation, that old voice in her head that reminded her of their age difference, of the world they lived in, of everything that shouldn't be. Anna, Mark's voice was gentle, but the way he said her name sent a shiver down her spine. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers lightly. The touch was electric, and Anna couldn't remember the last time she'd felt a connection this powerful. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was full of meaning, like a promise neither of them had said aloud. Anna felt her breath catch as Mark's hand lingered over hers, and it was then that she realized just how much she wanted him. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if it would be something lasting or fleeting. But in that moment it didn't matter. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand, the electricity that passed between them, and the undeniable pull of something far deeper than friendship. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I've wanted to feel this way for so long. Mark's lips curled into a soft, reassuring smile. So have I. His thumb traced the edge of her hand before he gently cupped it in both of his. I didn't think it could happen, not like this. But I don't want to ignore it, Anna. I don't want to let this go. For a heartbeat, they sat there, holding each other's gaze, as if the rest of the world had fallen away. It felt like a moment of recognition, of two souls finding each other in the vastness of time and life's uncertainties. And as Anna allowed herself to feel it fully, she knew that this was no longer just a fleeting connection. It was real. It was happening. And no matter how much her heart raced with both fear and excitement, she knew this was only the beginning. The days after Mark's visit were a haze of emotions, a swirl of excitement tempered by moments of doubt. Anna couldn't stop thinking about the evening they'd shared, the way he had looked at her, the way his touch had made her feel both safe and exhilarated at once. But now, in the quiet moments of her daily life, she began to wonder, what did this all mean? Was it just a fleeting spark, something that would fizzle out as quickly as it had ignited? Or was it something more? Sitting by the window, watching the world outside turn golden with the late afternoon sun, Anna thought about the years that had shaped her life. She had been married once, had raised children, had buried the man she loved more than anything, and had learned to live with the loneliness that followed. For so long, she had accepted that love had passed her by, that her time for passion, for connection was over. But now, with Mark, it felt like she was waking up from a long slumber. He brought her joy, yes, but more than that, he made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. He didn't see her as old, as someone whose best years were behind her. He saw her as she was, beautiful, vibrant, and worthy of love. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. Society had taught her that love had an expiration date, that there were certain rules for women like her, women in their 50s, who had been through life's ups and downs. There were boundaries, expectations, and judgments she couldn't ignore. People would talk, she was sure of it. They would ask questions, make assumptions, look at her like she was doing something wrong. But why should she care? Why should she let the opinions of others dictate how she lived her life? Especially now when she had spent so many years following a path that wasn't truly her own. She thought about her mother, who had always been so practical, so conservative in her ideas of love and relationships. She had raised Anna to believe that age was a factor in everything, that certain doors closed after a certain point. But Mark had opened her eyes to something entirely different. Age, in their case, was just a number. It didn't define their connection. Their bond wasn't about how many years separated them, but about the way they saw each other, the way they respected and cared for one another. With a deep breath, Anna decided to stop apologizing for her feelings. She would no longer shrink away from the happiness that had found its way into her life. This wasn't a mistake. This was the next chapter in her story, and she would write it with boldness. Love, she realized, didn't come with an expiration date. It didn't matter how old she was, how many years had passed, or what the world thought. What mattered was the present, what she felt in this moment, what she shared with Mark. And as she allowed herself to embrace that truth, she found peace in it. In the quiet of her living room, Anna closed her eyes and smiled. For the first time in a long while, she felt at home in her own heart. And she knew whatever the future held, she would walk into it with her head held high, ready to embrace whatever love had yet to offer. As the days passed, Anna found herself more and more at ease with the direction her life had taken. She wasn't afraid anymore of age, of judgment, or of the complexities that came with loving someone younger. The world might have its own rules, but she had long since learned that the heart doesn't obey them. She and Mark continued to grow closer, each meeting deepening their connection. There were still moments of uncertainty, of course. Those moments when her mind would wander to the judgment of others, to the potential whispers and sideways glances. But every time those fears crept in, Mark was there, steady and unwavering. He never made her feel anything less than beautiful, desirable, and cherished. Anna had learned something important in this unexpected chapter of her life. Love doesn't look a certain way. It doesn't come wrapped in a neat, tidy package that fits society's expectations. Sometimes, love appears in the most surprising places, at the most unexpected times. And when it does, it has the power to change everything. She thought about the younger versions of herself, the one who had been too afraid to take risks, too uncertain to live fully. In many ways, she had grown into someone new, someone who wasn't bound by the constraints of age, who wasn't afraid to embrace the joy that life still had to offer. She realized that love wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that took unexpected twists and turns, but was always worth the ride. Anna's reflection on her relationship with Mark made her realize how much it had taught her, not just about the resilience of love, but about herself. She had become more open, more willing to embrace all the complexities of life. She had found a strength she didn't know she had, a strength that came from loving fully, without hesitation. And as she looked ahead, Anna couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for this second chance at love. She had spent so many years feeling like a passenger in her own life, but now, she was the one driving. She was the one deciding what came next. And for the first time in ages, she was excited to see where it would take her. As the sun set over her quiet home, Anna looked out the window, a soft smile playing on her lips. She had found love again, and it had come in a form she hadn't expected, but it was perfect all the same. Love, she had discovered, didn't care about the rules. It was simply a force of nature, sweeping her off her feet and reminding her that no matter your age, your heart is always capable of new beginnings. With Mark by her side, Anna knew that no matter the challenges, they would face them together. And for the first time in a long time, she believed in the promise of love unfolding, limitless, and eternal at any age.